illegal hunting activities on your own land. That was the line printed in bold at the top of the notice, like it was a crime report. And for a second, standing barefoot on my porch with the morning sun bouncing off that pristine white envelope, I thought I had misread it. They actually fined me for hunting on my own property. I laughed at first. Not the amused kind of laugh, but the breathless, are-you-kidding-me chuckle that comes right before your blood starts to boil. The edges of the paper crinkled in my hand as I read it again, each word heavier than the last. Behind me, the sound of crows cut through the early quiet, as if even the birds were mocking me. The kicker? The violation was signed with Margaret's neat, looping signature, the kind she practiced to look like authority itself. That's when the humor slipped out of me and I felt the weight of it. Margaret wasn't just reaching over the line. She had launched herself across it. Margaret, our HOA president, lived 3 doors down in a house with shutters painted the color of approved forest green. She treated those bylaws like gospel and herself like the high priestess. If a trash can sat out past sundown, she knew. If your mailbox paint faded by a shade, you'd get a letter. And now? Apparently, she had promoted herself to wildlife warden. I crumpled the notice and stormed back inside, my boots thudding against the hardwood. The smell of coffee hit me burning, because I'd forgotten it on the pot, and I cursed under my breath. I couldn't let this slide. Not this time. That evening, I marched into the community meeting with the notice smoothed out again, still creased but readable. The room smelled like folding chairs and faint mildew, the kind of church basement setting where Margaret thrived. She was already there, perched at the folding table like a queen on a throne, binder of bylaws open in front of her, her pearls gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Ah, Mr. Lawson," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I trust you've reviewed your violation notice." I held it up. "I have, and you fined me for hunting, on my own property, which, last I checked, is outside your jurisdiction." Gasps fluttered through the room. A couple of neighbors glanced at each other, trying not to smile, but Margaret didn't flinch. "The community," she said, tapping the binder with her pen, "has agreed to protect local wildlife. It is in the spirit of the bylaws." "The spirit?" I shot back. "Margaret, deer eat half the gardens on this street. You've turned a nuisance into your personal crusade." Her smile never cracked. That was her trick. She weaponized patience, pretending every objection was just noise before her inevitable decree. One man in the back muttered, "Didn't know she could police outside our lots." His wife shushed him fast, but I caught the glimmer of rebellion. "Let me be clear," Margaret continued. "You fired a weapon within community limits. That violates the safety provisions." Now she had me boxed in, at least technically. I had fired a rifle, but it was aimed at coyotes, and my property line stretched a good mile beyond the nearest house. Still, she had twisted the language enough to make it sound dangerous. "You think posting fines on my porch is going to stop coyotes?" I asked, stepping closer. My voice carried more heat than I intended, but I didn't care. "You're overstepping, Margaret, and I won't pay this." The room hummed with tension, neighbors shifting in their chairs, some leaning forward like they were at a prize fight. Margaret leaned back, cool as ice. "Then you'll face additional penalties," she said simply, "and suspension of community privileges." I almost laughed again. Privileges. Like access to the tiny pool nobody used and the trails that snaked behind the ridge. Still, it was the principle. Margaret didn't care about safety or wildlife. This was about control. She wanted to prove she could reach past the edge of my porch and into my life. I walked out before she could gavel the meeting shut. The notice crumpled in my fist again. The night air outside was sharp with the smell of pine and damp earth, a contrast to the stale room I'd just left. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Neighbors slipped out behind me, some offering sympathetic glances, others avoiding my eyes. By the time I reached my truck, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a fine. This was the opening shot in something bigger. Margaret had picked the wrong man to target. Later that week, as I watched deer munching on the edge of my garden like freeloaders at an open buffet, I thought again about Margaret's smug face. She believed she held all the cards, that her binder of bylaws could stretch forever. But I had started digging literally and figuratively. A casual conversation with a county clerk had revealed something Margaret probably didn't even know, something that made my anger shift into a quiet, dangerous kind of excitement. Because if Margaret wanted to weaponize property lines, I was about to redraw the map entirely, and the next time she tried to lecture me about community spirit, it would be from the wrong side of a locked gate. "Exclusive rights," I said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Margaret, you don't even own the dirt under your own deck, and now you're claiming the hillside?" The lakeside gathering went silent, just the water lapping against the dock and the crackle of someone's citronella torch filling the pause. Margaret's smile twitched but didn't break, the same smug expression she wore like armor. She thrived on these ambushes, making her announcements in public, where embarrassment kept people from arguing back. But this time she'd overplayed. I could feel the shift in the air, neighbors glancing between us like spectators waiting to see who would throw the first punch. That night was supposed to be simple. Just a barbecue by the water, neighbors milling around with plastic cups of sweet tea and the smell of grilled chicken drifting across the lake. Then Margaret arrived, pearls glinting in the twilight, and within minutes she had seized the spotlight. She clinked her glass and declared, with the kind of pomp usually reserved for royal decrees, that the HOA now had exclusive recreational rights to the trails running up the ridge behind my property. I nearly choked on my drink. "Exclusive rights," she repeated, savoring the phrase like it was champagne. "For the benefit of our community. We must preserve the beauty of these trails from misuse." Everyone clapped politely because that's what you did when Margaret spoke. But I caught more than one set of raised eyebrows. Those trails weren't on HOA land. They ran through parcels owned by the county, some of it leased out, some of it just forgotten woodland. I'd hiked them since I was a kid, long before the HOA existed, and I knew exactly how flimsy her claim was. I didn't challenge her right then. Not fully. I let the words hang, let her enjoy her round of applause, even as my blood simmered. The very next morning, I drove into town and parked outside the county records office, a squat brick building that smelled faintly of dust and toner. Inside, a clerk with wire-rimmed glasses and the patience of a saint pulled up the files for me. "Those parcels?" he said, flipping through a stack of manila folders. "Most of them are county surplus. Haven't been properly claimed in decades. They're actually listed for potential sale." I blinked. "For sale?" He nodded. "Cheap, too. No structures, just rough land. Not much interest, unless someone's into hunting or hiking." I don't know if he noticed the grin spreading across my face, but in that moment the sting of Margaret's smug announcement melted into something sweeter. Opportunity. She'd built her entire stage on a foundation she didn't even own, and now I could buy it out from under her. The paperwork took time, nothing dramatic, just stacks of forms, signatures, and a check that felt both painful and exhilarating. A week later, I held the deed. 5 parcels stitched together into a single stretch of woodland that included every inch of those exclusive hiking trails. My trails now. I didn't make an announcement. Not yet. I let it simmer, let the ownership settle in my bones while Margaret paraded around, talking up the community's new rights. She even sent out a newsletter printed in color, no less proclaiming the secured preservation of our beloved hiking ridge. I kept that newsletter. Still have it. The first whispers started when a neighbor asked her about trail maintenance. Margaret brushed him off with her usual confidence, but I could see cracks forming. Because what happens when someone claims authority they don't have? Eventually, someone pulls the rug out. That someone was me. It all came to a head one Saturday morning when Margaret marched up to me at the dock. The lake shimmered under the sun, kids splashing near the shallows, the smell of sunscreen heavy in the air. She had her binder clutched under one arm like a Bible. "Mr. Lawson," she said sweetly. "I'd like to remind you that firearms are strictly prohibited on community trails." "Community trails?" I asked, letting the words hang. "You mean my trails?" Her head tilted, the smile faltering just slightly. "The HOA voted to secure rights." I pulled the folded deed from my back pocket, the county seal crisp in the sunlight. "And the county voted to sell. Guess who bought them?" For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret lost her composure. It was quick, just a flicker in her eyes, but I caught it. The neighbors nearby caught it too. "Those trails belong to me now," I continued, "so unless you're planning to pay rent, I suggest you keep your board off them." A stunned silence rippled across the dock. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, then turned sharply on her heel and stormed back toward her house, binder clutched so tight her knuckles blanched. That was my turning point. The fine she'd slapped on me had been her opening move, but this was me planting my flag. For the first time, Margaret wasn't untouchable, and yet, even as I stood there basking in the neighbors' shocked looks, I knew this wasn't over. Margaret never surrendered. She schemed, she maneuvered, she retaliated. And if the way she clutched that binder was any clue, she was already flipping pages in her head, hunting for the next clause to weaponize. I'd won the trails. But the war was only beginning. The padlock clanged shut with a finality that echoed across the gravel lot. Margaret's shriek hit the air a second later. "You can't do this!" Oh, but I could, and I had. The chain rattled as I gave it one last tug, the sound sharp as breaking glass. The new steel gate gleamed in the morning sun, still smelling faintly of fresh paint and hot metal. Behind me, the trail stretched into the trees, quiet and untouched, like it was already reclaiming itself. In front of me? Chaos. Margaret and her entourage of board members clustered at the trailhead, their lawn chairs and water bottles forgotten as they stared at the gate in horror. It was like watching a stage curtain drop in the middle of their performance. One second they were gearing up for a community hike, the next their exclusive recreational rights had vanished in a single swing of a gate. To really understand why this moment landed like a bomb, you have to rewind a few weeks. Margaret hadn't taken her loss lightly when I revealed I'd bought the trails. She'd gone into overdrive letters printed on HOA letterhead, meetings called at odd hours, a steady drizzle of updates in the community newsletter about pending litigation. Every note ended with some vague warning about consequences. She wanted to scare me into backing down, but all it did was prove how much she hated losing. Neighbors were caught in the middle. Some nodded along with her speeches, still too timid to cross her. Others started stopping by my dock in the evenings, casual conversations laced with questions. "So, you really own it now?" Or, "Does that mean she can't ticket us anymore?" I never gave more than a half smile in reply. Let Margaret's panic write the story for me. But then she made her mistake. She scheduled a community hike for the very trails she no longer controlled, announcing it with glossy flyers tucked under every doormat. I picked mine up one morning, still damp from dew, and felt my jaw tighten. She wasn't just bluffing, she was daring me to call her on it. So I did. On the morning of the hike, I rolled up in my truck with a brand new steel gate rattling in the back. The air smelled like pine sap and gasoline as I unloaded it, the crunch of gravel under my boots mixing with the thud of posts driving into the dirt. By the time Margaret and her followers arrived matching sun visors, bottled water, the whole show I was already threading the chain through, the look on her face when the lock clicked shut, worth every penny. "You're trespassing," Margaret screeched, binder clutched to her chest like it could protect her. "This is HOA property." "No," I said calmly, dusting my hands. "This is my property, and the gate says closed." Gasps rippled through her entourage. One of the board members, a wiry guy named Paul, tried to play peacemaker. "Surely we can work something out," he said, sweat beading on his forehead. "The community relies on these trails." "Funny," I replied. "The county clerk didn't mention community rights when I signed the deed." That lit the fuse. Voices rose all at once, board members arguing in circles while Margaret shouted over them, threatening lawsuits, calling me reckless, warning that the law was on her side. I let it wash over me, the shrill pitch of her fury mixing with the sound of cicadas buzzing in the heat. A few neighbors stood off to the side, watching with wide eyes, realizing in real time that the trails were gone for good. The turning point came when Margaret tried to push past the gate. She grabbed the chain, tugged it like sheer indignation might break steel, and then looked at me with fire in her eyes. "This is illegal," she hissed. "Then call the sheriff," I said, meeting her glare. "See if he agrees." Silence fell. Not because she backed down, Margaret never truly backed down, but because she knew the sheriff had bigger problems than a locked hiking path. And, deep down, she knew the law was on my side. Her face flushed red, a mix of fury and humiliation, and for a brief, glorious moment, I saw the queen stripped of her crown. The board huddled after that, whispering in urgent tones while I leaned against the gatepost, arms crossed, enjoying the view. Margaret tried one last speech, her voice shaking as she declared, "This fight isn't over," before storming off toward the parking lot. Her entourage scrambled after her, leaving the gravel lot scattered with folding chairs and half-drunk water bottles, abandoned like a retreating army's weapons. I stood there for a while, the sun climbing higher, the gate casting a long shadow across the lot. For the first time since that fine landed on my porch, I felt the ground shift under my feet, this time in my favor. The trails were mine. The gate was mine. And Margaret's pride had snapped louder than the lock I'd just fastened. But victory in an HOA war is never clean. That evening, as I sat on my deck with a cold drink, a neighbor strolled by and muttered, "Careful, Margaret's not done. She's talking to a lawyer." I smiled into my glass, the ice clinking softly. Margaret had thrown everything she had at me and lost. If she wanted to drag lawyers into it, fine, because I was ready for her. And if the gate was a monument to her overreach, then what came next would be the wrecking ball.